Organization of life. It starts with the atom and then goes all the way to the biosphere, okay? So if you have a look at the chapters that we've studied so far, we're going through that biological level of organization. We looked at the characteristics of life. We looked at chemistry of life. So we're looking at the macromolecules at the molecular level, at the atomic level, okay? Then we looked at the cell level. So macromolecules make up the cell, so next level of organization. Now we're looking at the tissue levels, okay? So how cells make up different tissues. And the study of tissues is known as histology, okay? So before we studied cells, that study is known as cytology. So when we're studying different tissues, we call this histology. So we're going from cells to different organ systems. So if you have a look at the outline of this chapter, we are studying from 4.1 to 4.5. So first we look at how tissues form from a group of cells with common functions, and then we look at the 4 different major types of tissues. The epithelial tissue, so it covers body surfaces and lines cavities. So your skin, for example, is epithelial tissue inside your mouth, inside your digestive system, all the cavities in your body. Okay. Then we have the connective tissue, so it supports and connects. So like bone is connective tissue, cartilage is connective tissue, tendons, and so on. These are connective tissue, okay, that support and connect body parts. Then you got the muscles for movement, so we've got 3 different types of muscles. And the nervous system, which transmits impulses, so communication in your body, all right? So the 4 different types of tissues we will learn. Now, in terms of your objectives, first you need to know, define, by the end of this chapter, you have to define what tissues are, and then discuss and compare and give the function of different types, the 4 different types of tissues, okay? So you should be able to give me, if I give you what's this tissue and what's its function, okay? So the anatomy and the physiology of those different tissues, okay? So do you remember that definition in the tissue from the level of organization? So it's a group of specialized cells that happen to have a similar structure and they perform a common function, okay? So specific type of specialized cells have similar structure and they perform a common function. So these are the things to remember. They have a common function and they are similar type of cells. That's what tissue is. Now, surrounding tissue, we find something called the extracellular matrix, so outside of the cells. And usually this helps to make up the consistency of the tissue. So it could be in the form of liquid, like in blood. Blood is a connective tissue, so the extracellular matrix in blood is liquid, okay? Or jelly-like in some connective tissue, like areolar connective tissue under your skin. The extracellular matrix is like a jelly structure. Semi-solid, like cartilage, okay? It has a semi-solid extracellular matrix, and sometimes it has a solid extracellular matrix. This you find in bone, bone is very solid, okay, rigid, you can't move it. So depending on the type of tissue, it will have a different type of extracellular matrix, which is produced by the cells of the tissue, okay? So these matrix are produced by the cells of the tissue and it's secreted outside to form the extracellular. So extracellular means outside of the cell, okay? So we can have several types of tissues. Remember the next level of organization, we got the organ. So several types of tissues can form an organ like the heart. So in the heart we can find epithelial tissue, we can find muscle tissue, we can find connective tissue, okay? So 3 different types of tissues we can find in the heart. So remember that an organ system, what was that?
Among the organs.
Group of organs. Like in the
Yeah.
digestive system, we find what?
The liver.
Yes,
The stomach.
Stomach. Kidney is urinary system.
Intestine.
The intestines, the stomach, the esophagus, the mouth, all these form part of the digestive system. So an organ system. And as I mentioned before, the 4 types of different tissues: the epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle, and nervous. And this chapter will concentrate on the 4 different type of tissues.
So you
And-
understand the extracellular.
So extracellular matrix is outside of the cell, okay? So you got the cells here, in the tissue, and you got, different things outside: protein, water, carbohydrates, okay? Ions sometimes, or different, like if you're looking at bone, calcium, phosphate,
Yeah.
it's a very hard extracellular matrix. Or if you're looking at blood, it will be a very liquid type of extracellular matrix, like plasma. Okay,
Outside of the cell.
outside of the cell. Okay, so outside of the cell, whatever we find outside where the cells are, we call that the extracellular matrix. Okay, it helps to bind the cells together and keeps them in. Sometimes, in liquid, they can float through it,
And it's
because blood needs to move around your body. The extracellular matrix should be liquid, so the cells can float in it. Sometimes, like bone, it needs to be hard, okay, rigid, so it doesn't break. Or in cartilage, it needs to be soft, okay, because sometimes in the vertebra we have cartilage that helps to
What is it, doctor?
give cushion.
Cartilage.
Cartilage.
What's cartilage?
We'll learn about it later. So it's a connective tissue. You find it in between bones, on the surface of the end of the bones, okay? On the surface of the end bones, okay? Like between, if sometimes you bring meat from the shops, you see the bone on the end is very shiny and soft sometimes, the bone.
Yeah.
This is cartilage at the end of the bone,
Ah, okay.
cartilage.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll look at in more detail the different type of each of these tissues and their functions. Okay. So depending on the type of tissue, it will have a different matrix, extracellular matrix. Okay, because that's important for its function. So we'll move on now to the epithelial tissue. We find epithelial tissue everywhere in our body. On the skin, all the skin is covered with epithelial tissue. It's very important as a protection against, sometimes pathogens. It acts as a barrier. It acts to protect our skin against, when you touching things, when you're moving things, when you're putting abrasion, so it doesn't get damage your body. So if you rub on something, you're moving all the time, it protects your body from abrasion. So then you have other epithelial tissue you find in all the cavities, okay? Cavities and surfaces. Cavity means hollow organs. For example, like the blood vessel is hollow. Inside of it, the blood vessel is covered with epithelial tissue. The stomach, the digestive system, the mouth, all of these are hollow organs. Means there is a space, what we call a lumen. Okay, so your mouth is hollow, isn't it? It's got a cavity. Your mouth is surrounded by epithelial tissue. So you find epithelial tissue in your mouth. You find it in the kidneys. Okay, remember in chapter, I think it was chapter 1, we talked about the kidney tubules, how it's got these cuboidal cells. Remember, structure and function are related. That part of chapter 1.
Yes.
We showed these images of different type of cells. So
Yeah.
the same type of cell will have the same function in different organisms. Okay, like in a frog and in a human. If it's kidney
They have
tubules,
similar
you'll have
to each
similar
other.
structure and function.
This one.
So you remember the kidney cells? They have these cuboidal type.
This one.
Yes. So there is one image there. We find it in the male reproductive system, the epididymis. So this type of some some epithelial tissue can act as mucus secreting cells, okay? So they can help in protection, like in the trachea, we have epithelial tissue. We have it in the digestive system. Epithelial tissue would also produce secretions of mucus. It's very important for protection, okay? Sometimes in the trachea, it helps to trap dust particles and pathogens, or in the digestive system, it helps you to protect against the, the acids and the digestive enzymes of the digestive system. So it doesn't, those digestive enzymes in your stomach, they break down the macromolecules of life, the proteins, the lipids, the carbohydrates, and nucleic acids. If your cells were exposed to those digestive systems, what will happen? What's your cells made up of? The 4 macromolecules, isn't it? So the digestive enzymes will break down. So our digestive lining is, it has these epithelial tissues which secrete mucus, okay? So we'll talk about that later as well. So if you look at all the cavities and the surfaces of the body, we find epithelial tissue, okay? It's very important. Sometimes epithelial tissue can also act as glands, okay? The glands, the endocrine and exocrine glands. So sweat glands, you sweat on your skin, these are glands. These glands are made up of epithelial tissue, okay? They secrete the water and the ions that you get on your skin when you sweat, okay? Sometimes, you talk about the endocrine glands, like the pancreas, okay? It produces insulin. Endocrine gland, it releases insulin. Insulin is a hormone which regulates glucose levels in your blood. So the organ, the pancreas, has these exocrine glands. We call them the islets of Langerhans. They produce insulin and release it into the blood. So this is an endocrine function in the blood. So exocrine is on the surface or on a cavity. Okay.
Please repeat what you just said.
So epithelial tissue can form exocrine gland or endocrine glands.
Okay.
So exocrine glands, they release their content into a surface or into a cavity. Okay, we have many exocrine glands, like the salivary glands. It produces saliva, releases it into your mouth. The sweat glands produce sweat. We have gastric glands that produce the juices of the gastric juices in your stomach. We have lots of glands. In the female, they have the mammary glands, produce milk. Okay, so there's many type of exocrine glands in our body. So they produce their product and release it into the outside, a cavity, a surface, okay? This is called an exo. Remember, exocrine gland. So exo means outside, okay? While endocrine glands, they release it into the blood. They produce hormones, okay? Like insulin, like testosterone, and so on, okay? We'll learn more about this next semester in the endocrine system, all the different glands, endocrine glands of the body, okay? So for now, we need to know that they're epithelial tissue, both of these, okay? So, when we look at epithelial tissue, we find them that they're very tightly packed. You see there's very little room between them. So epithelial tissue is tightly packed together. So when we look at some other tissues, like in bone or in blood, the cells are not tightly, they far apart, okay? So in epithelial tissue, they're very tightly packed and there's not much extracellular matrix, okay? So in epithelial tissue, you find very little extracellular matrix because the cells are very tightly packed. There's not much space for extracellular matrix, okay? So as I said, you get it in the body cavities like the mouth, the digestive system, the blood vessels, in the reproductive system of male and females. So all these cavities and the surfaces like your skin, okay? All of it is lined with epithelial tissue. So it forms like a sheet. That's why there's no extracellular matrix. You can see this, it's like a sheet of paper. The cells are very packed together.
No space.
No space at all. So, the function of this is in protection, like your skin, okay? Reduce friction in your internal organs. We find epithelial tissue, it produces some lubricants. You know lubricant? Like you put oil in your engine in the car, every 10,000 kilometers you have to change it. If you don't put the oil, what happens to the car? You'll drive 10 kilometers and the engine is gone. It'll overheat and destroy it. It's a lubricant, reduces friction, okay? You know friction when you're rubbing your hand?
Yes.
You know, if you put some oil on your hand and rub it, it's easy to rub, okay? If you rub it dry, there's friction. So sometimes some epithelial tissue, it produces lubricants, okay? Like, in your internal organs, they're sitting there inside the cavity, okay? The abdominal cavity. When you're moving, they're just touching each other all the time. If they didn't have lubricant between them, you'll get irritated and you'll get abrasion between them, okay? So you get lots of friction and it will damage the tissue, correct? If it's touching, it's rubbing all the time, the tissue will get damaged.
So that's when it produces lubricants.
It produces a lubricant, and the type of lubricant, it's called serous fluid. It's produced by these epithelial tissue. It keeps it reduces friction, okay? So the function is to reduce friction. Have you learned about friction in physics?
Yes.
It's very important in physics, It's like a force that when friction is acting on an object, it reduces, if it's in motion, it slows it down, doesn't it?
Yes.
It's an opposing. So in this case, in your body, you got lots of friction between the organs. So epithelial tissue covers them and produces lubricants to prevent friction, okay? So in transport of materials, so in the digestive tract, in the small intestine, we have epithelial tissue, okay? That transport the nutrients that you've obtained from your food that you've eaten into your bloodstream so you can use it. Like glucose and amino acids and so on, and all the ions in water. So transport.
Doctor, what is the name of the epithelial cell that causes the transporting of materials?
So it's epithelial. We'll learn about it. We're gonna go one by one. Okay?
Oh, okay.
I'm just giving you a summary here. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Because it's saying it has these functions. I'm just giving you
Okay.
where exactly. But
Yeah.
it's a simple column epithelium of the small intestine. Okay, are important in transport. Okay.
Mm.
There's other examples too. Okay.
Okay.
So just one example. Absorption. Taking up materials, like in the kidney tubules. We saw. Remember those cuboidal cells in the kidney tubule? So we'll go through this anyways, but I'll just show you what a kidney tubule looks like. Here, you see this? This is a kidney tubule. You see there's a hollow space in the middle?
Mm.
And these are cuboidal cells, okay? Cuboidal cells, they absorb the materials like glucose, amino acids, water, ion back from the urine, okay? The filtrate, I should say, okay? So they're very important in absorbing, taking back. That's what absorption means. So in absorption, elimination, and in the same kidney, you find other cells, similar cells that eliminate waste, okay? So they remove waste from your blood, like urea and so on, okay? Diffusion, you remember diffusion? So in your lungs, yeah, we talked about in your lungs, there's epithelial tissue, okay? That when you breathe in oxygen, it diffuses across the cells into the blood. So epithelial tissue is very important in diffusion as well.
So in the lungs, when you diffuse oxygen?
So it diffuses across the epithelial tissue into the blood.
Okay.
And then we said we can find epithelial tissue that make the glands, the endocrine and exocrine glands, okay? So exocrine glands produce products which are secreted out of the gland into body cavities or surfaces, okay? or you got the endocrine gland, which secretes hormones into the blood. So those two gland types are made up of epithelial tissue. So before we get on to the main type of epithelial tissue, we'll just talk about the two, reiterate what exocrine and endocrine glands are. So sometimes they can be unicellular, okay? A single cell can act as a gland. So in this case, a goblet cell. So we find this in our trachea, okay, as an example. So you see this cell here, looks different to that. It looks more clear. This is a goblet cell. It secretes mucus in the. So this is actually the trachea. Okay. So the trachea releases goblet cells, and we find in the trachea these little hair-like structures called cilia. Okay.
Yeah.
So these help. The mucus traps the particles that we breathe in. Okay. And the cilia push it back up the trachea, you spit it out or whatever, okay? You cough it out. So the cells that make that mucus are known as goblet cells, and they're exocrine gland. And you see there's one cell, so it's a unicellular gland, okay?
So cells that make the cilia are called the goblet.
Not the cilia, the mucus.
Oh, the mucus.
The mucus, okay? You know what mucus is, everybody?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, make sure you know what mucus is. Mucus is there to trap the pathogens that you breathe in or the particles that you breathe in through the air. So we find these cells. So here's another example, very clear. This is a goblet cell that produces the mucus. So it's one cell acting as a what type of gland? Endocrine or exocrine?
Endocrine.
It's producing
Oh, no,
mucus.
Exocrine.
Exocrine. Endocrine glands produce hormones. Mucus is not a hormone.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
So whenever there's a secretion, I'm talking about mucus, sweat, or saliva, or milk, or whatever, these are secretion. These are exocrine glands, okay?
Okay.
When I talk about hormones, it's endocrine.
Endocrine.
Okay? So make sure you know that. So it can be unicellular, or it can be made up of many cells, like the pancreas has both endocrine and exocrine. It acts as a both because it produces some enzymes for the digestive system. If it's producing enzyme for the digestive system, is it an endocrine or exocrine gland? Exocrine gland, because it's producing some enzymes that are needed for the digestive system. But at the same time, the pancreas produces insulin and glucagon, which are hormones. Is that endocrine function or exocrine? Endocrine, okay? So it's a multicellular organ, okay? So we can find glands that are single cell, which we call unicellular glands, or multicellular, made up of many cells. So exocrine glands, we said, produce and secrete into surfaces and cavities, their products. So hollow means it's a cavity, okay? Like the mouth, In the mouth, we produce saliva and the salivary glands. We have many salivary, actually 4 of them. Salivary glands that produce the saliva that is important in lubricating the food and digesting carbohydrates, okay? Breaking them down. So the saliva is produced in the salivary gland and it's released into the hollow organ, which is the mouth. So it is a exocrine gland. Everybody got that?
Yeah.
Okay, make sure. So examples like, as I said, the salivary gland, sweat glands, gastric glands in your stomach produce the gastric juice, which is the, pepsin and HCl and those things, okay?
Is it in the stomach?
It's in the stomach, the gastric glands, okay? So these are all exocrine glands. They produce their products and release them into hollow organs or ducts. Duct is the same as a cavity, okay, or a pipe, and then it's from a duct it's released into a hollow organ, okay. So this is that you see here. There's the epithelial tissue of the exocrine gland, it produces its material, okay? So this is a duct, okay? These are the cells that produce it all around, and this space here is a duct, and then the duct finally leads into here, in this case, a hollow organ or your skin or surface, all right? So the duct, this part is the duct, okay? This space, okay?
Oh, okay. So the duct basically is just it's like a passage.
Yeah, passage from where the products are produced to where they're gonna end up
End up in the hollow.
in the cavity or in the
Cavity,
surface.
okay.
Okay, you got that? So, in contrast, endocrine glands, they don't release their products into hollow organs or surfaces. Their products are released into the blood because they act as messengers. Remember that lock and key function where the hormone binds to a receptor on a cell and causes a change inside the cell?
Yes.
So hormones need to go into the blood because the blood moves throughout your body. It can transport the hormone anywhere where the hormone acts, okay? So it's the best place to go because it can take a ride to its destination. For example, the insulin has effect on muscles and liver. How is it gonna get there? When it's produced in the pancreas, it's nowhere near the muscles or liver up, correct? So it needs to be released into the blood, and the blood flows to all organs, so it can get there. So that's why exocrine or endocrine, I should say, glands produce their products, hormones. It's released into the blood and then it's distributed throughout the body, but it only acts on organs which have the receptor. Remember that lock and key again?
Yes.
So it can go in everywhere, but if the receptor is not available, it has no effect on those cells. So another example is the thyroid gland. We find it here. It produces thyroxine, okay, very important hormone for growth and metabolism.
Where we can't find it?
Yeah, near the what should I call it? The larynx? You know the larynx, the voice box.
Yeah.
It surrounds the voice box. Okay. When we next semester, you will know exactly what type of hormones and function of this thyroid gland are. We have many glands in our body that are endocrine. It's very important. And the master gland we find in the brain, we call the pituitary gland. Okay.
Pituitary?
Pituitary gland.
How do you spell it?
I think that's the spelling.
Pituitary. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So epithelial tissue form glands.
And thyroid gland is in the voice box, right?
Yes. It's not. It surrounds the voice box. Okay. So not actually the voice box. All right. So let's move on to what epithelial, the different type of epithelial tissue and what the structure and function is. So we find that epithelial tissue is always sitting on a basement membrane. Okay. So this basement membrane is what attaches the epithelial tissue to the underlying tissue. So underneath it, whatever tissue is there, it's usually connective tissue, okay? We find this basement membrane, okay? Let me highlight it for you here. So here, this is the epithelial tissue. Can you see that there?
Yeah.
You see this dark little membrane here underneath it? Then we find the other tissue. This is connective tissue, okay?
What's connective tissue?
We're gonna learn about that. So, out of this four type of tissue. So, connective tissue
okay,
is a supporting and binding tissue. Okay. So, in this case, there's the connective tissue. There's the epithelial tissue. Right here. So, this is the epithelial. Okay. Now, we find between this and that what we call a basement membrane. This is the basement membrane. Okay. Here again. So this is produced by the epithelial tissue. So it's made up of proteins and carbohydrates. So it acts as a structural support, okay? It anchors, okay? You know the word anchor?
Hold.
It
Yeah,
holds this epithelial tissue to the connective
So
tissue.
it's like cell wall.
Um,
Supports and holds.
it's not a cell wall. It's like a glue,
Oh, okay.
like a glue, okay?
Okay.
It glues the epithelial tissue to the connective tissue.
Oh, okay.
All right? Because otherwise it needs some sort of connection between the two
Okay.
tissues.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's an adhesive, okay?
Okay, and the above one, it's also connective tissue. This one,
Here.
no.
Yeah, this is structure of the
The cilia.
epithelium, the cilia. So you find on the bottom a basement membrane always on all epithelial tissue. On the free surface, here will be hollow or there will be nothing here, okay? It will be hollow or cavity, surface of the skin or the mouth. Remember, epithelial tissue covers surfaces and hollow organs, okay? So here, either it will be a free surface. On the free surface, okay, you will have cilia, okay, or sometimes microvilli, okay.
Doctor, so underline the basement membrane, there is a connective tissue. Underline the basement
Yes.
membrane.
Yes. So what the basement membrane does is it anchors, it glues, it holds the epithelial tissue to the connective tissue.
Yeah.
We got that?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's made up of proteins, as I say, and this helps to anchor it, okay, to the connective tissue
Have a
underneath it.
specific name?
Basement membrane.
Basement membrane.
Yeah, it's written here. And okay. So we find the basement membrane here. On this surface, we might find sometimes cilia or microvilli. Cilia and the trachea, you know, the airway, we find cilia. Microvilli, we find it in the kidney tubules and in the digestive system in the small intestine, okay? So it increases microvilli, what does it do?
Increase the absorption.
Yeah, increased surface area, remember? More
Yeah.
surface for absorption. Cilia it's not there to increase surface area. It's there as a way to remove the dust and particles, for example, in the trachea, okay? So it has a movement. While microvilli increases surface area.
Doctor,
Yes.
underlying means that
Underneath it.
underneath it. Okay.
Underlying
Okay.
underneath it, okay? So underneath the epithelial tissue is what?
Connective.
Connective tissue. So the basement membrane connects the epithelial tissue to the underlying connective tissue. That's what it means, all right?
This is the basement.
So the basement membrane is that, you know, here you can see it. Here, you see that? Sometimes it depends on how the tissue is stained in the section. Sometimes it's very clear, sometimes it's not that clear. So we will. Yeah, it's more clear in this one, where I drawn it, okay? Okay?
Okay.
So we classify epithelial tissue on two characteristics, okay? First, on the number of layers, okay? How many layers we have of the epithelial tissue, one above the other?
On layers.
Layers,
Okay.
okay? So the number of layers, it could be one layer, 2, 3, 4, whatever, okay?
Okay.
So according to layers, and then we also, I think did I skip one?
No.
Okay. When we name it, obviously, when we name epithelial tissue, we talk about the layers first, then the shape. So, but you know, here it's talking about shape first. But epithelial tissue is always named according to the number of layers, then the shape. Okay. So let me just go to the number of. Where does it talk about layers? Okay, here. So when we name epithelial tissue, we talk about the number of layers first, okay? So if it's one layer, we call it simple epithelium, okay? So it's a single layer. And sometimes these are important because it's required in transport of molecules, okay? Diffusion or transport. So single layers, okay? Stratified, it means there's more than one. So it could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Stratified means layered, okay? It has many layers. That's what stratified means. Multi-layer. Basically, stratified means multi-layer, strata. That's what strata means, okay? Many layers. So epithelial tissue can come as a single layer, we call it simple, okay? When it's many layers, we call it stratified. So this is more for protection, okay? Because a lot of layers, like the skin is stratified. Lots of layers of epithelial tissue, it's important for protection. Sometimes it is called pseudo-stratified. It means that it's one layer, but it looks like multi-layered, okay? It appears to be multi-layered. The reason is because of two things, okay? One, if you have a look at the simple layer, you see all the cells are facing the free surface, correct?
Yes.
In pseudo-stratified, not all the cells face the free surface. You see, look at this cell here. It doesn't face it, okay? That's how you identify it. And the nuclei are not at one level. So you see the nucleus? They have different positions in the cells. So two things distinguish this from this, okay? Like the simple epithelia, all the cells are attached to the basement membrane, okay? So they're not on top of each other, okay? Like stratified. See, stratified are on top of each other.
Not all in the.
Not all of them are attached to the basement membrane. In simple, all the cells are attached to the basement membrane. Also in pseudo-stratified, all the cells attached, but not all of them are facing the free surface, okay? That's why it's called pseudo-stratified, because it looks like it has many layers, but in fact, it's only one layer.
Yeah.
It's called pseudo-stratified, like a false multi-layer, okay? It appears to be multi-layer, but it's a false. So, two differences. One, not all the cells face the free surface, okay? Unlike the simple where you find all the nuclei in one line, okay? So, if you have a look at this image here, if I can find one, no? Okay, here we go. You see this here? You see the nuclei? They're all at one level? All in one level. Correct? This is simple epithelia. Don't confuse it with stratified because the nuclei are all at one level.
Okay.
When you have a look at this one, this is pseudo-stratified. Can you see the nuclei? This is an actual histological staining of the trachea, I think. Yeah, it's the trachea. So you see the nuclei are at different level. They're not at the same level. Can you see that?
Yeah.
So the nuclei are at different level, but all the cells are attached to the basement membrane. So it's only one layer. Okay? It's not multi-layered. So that's why it's called pseudo-stratified epithelia. So these are. So first we talk about the number of layers when we're naming epithelial tissue. It could be simple, stratified, or pseudo-stratified. Any questions on that? Okay. The second is, we go back to the one slide before, we talk about the shape. Okay? So epithelial tissue can come in three shapes. Okay? One is a squamous, okay? Like a plate, squashed, very thin. Where would this be important, do you think? We talked about it before.
The skin.
The skin we find, and we find it as a protection, many layers. Sometimes it's important in transport, in diffusion. We find it in the lungs, okay? Where oxygen is transported. So it makes, molecules can easily diffuse across this. You see that? It's very flat. If it was like a cell shape like this or like that, it will take a long time for the oxygen and
Oh.
carbon dioxide to diffuse into the blood or tissues.
So the benefit of squaming that allows molecules to pass easily through it.
So there's a shorter distance between where the molecule is and where it needs to end up, okay?
Ah.
So it's very flat. Sometimes it's cuboidal. These sort of cells we find in the kidney, okay? It's important for absorption and secretion, okay? Or we find cube-shaped cells. That's why they're cuboidal. They look like a cube, you know. Or we find them in long columns, so we call them columnar. So the three different type of shapes. Okay. So we name them based on
The shape.
the
and layer.
layer and
Shape.
shape, like simple squamous. Okay. One layer of flat cells, one layer of squamous cells. We find that in the lungs, the alveoli, okay, and in the blood vessels. So we name it based on shape and the number of layers.
Where can we find the columnar shape?
Columnar, we find it in the small intestine.
Oh,
And
okay.
most of the digestive system is columnar, okay?
Okay.
All right, so let's start with the different types. So the first type we talk about is the simple epithelia. So simple, they all have how many layers?
One.
One layer. So simple squamous means that is one layer of flat cells, okay? So only one layer. We find this in blood vessels and air sacs. So in the lungs, you know, we got the air sacs, the alveoli. Have you heard of the structure called alveoli in the lungs? These are covered with this flat cells like this. You see this? So this is actually from the lining of the lungs. You see? It's a flat cell like this. It's very important for the transport of gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide.
Gas exchange.
Gas exchange. And that's why they're very thin layer, so a gas can pass through it
Easy
easily.
through it.
There's less distance to travel. And it's one layer, not many layers. So simple squamous. So it can exchange nutrients and wastes, okay?
And also in the
And
blood
gases.
vessels.
Yeah, so you find in the blood vessels it exchanges nutrients, okay?
Okay.
It can exchange glucose, amino acids, oxygen, and then it can take up back urea, which is waste, ammonia, and other metabolic waste, okay? So it's very important in that function because the transport can happen very quick. It's a flat cell. The second type is the simple, yes,
The last one, blood vessels and
blood vessels and so blood vessels and air sacs, okay? This is the lung, okay? There's no, it doesn't show any blood vessels, but the blood vessel, the inner lining
this one.
protects, okay?
Okay.
Sometimes it acts as a protection. Well, the skin is not for protect simple squamous. It's actually stratified squamous, okay? The skin. We find that.
Stratified with this squamous.
Yeah, but here we're talking about simple, okay? So I mean, it permits gas exchange, nutrient exchange, and waste. Okay, so that's simple squamous. That's why it's very important for that function. The second type of simple, so one layer, cuboidal, cube-shaped cells we find here in the kidney tubules. All right, so they're like cube-shaped. You know what a cube is?
Yeah.
Like that, you see? So that's a cube, okay? Cuboidal, that's why the name cube. If you have a look, this is an actual image of the kidney tubules. You find these cube-shaped cells. See, there's one cell, another cell. And you see underneath the cells, you find the, what is that?
Basement.
Basement membrane, okay?
Yeah.
So you find the basement membrane attaching it to the underlying connective tissue. Okay?
Okay.
So
This underline.
so this is the epithelial tissue. Underneath you'll find connective tissue. So the basement membrane connects it, okay?
Okay.
So we find the kidney and in the thyroid glands, okay? So in this case, you find the thyroid gland has simple cuboidal epithelia which produce the hormones of the in the thyroid gland like thyroxine, okay? So it can do secretion like hormones, or it can do reabsorb water and small molecules from the filtrate in urine formation, okay?
So the kidney can do two functions: absorb and secrete.
Yeah, it can absorb and secrete. Also, in this case, if you got the thyroid gland, it's also secreting the hormone, okay?
Does it absorb the hormone?
No,
Only secrete.
secrete the hormone. What's the time?
50 past?